This is a 3D maps exercise for your hips. In actual fact, it's an exercise designed to work your kinetic chain from the ground up. So we're trying to get your foot complex, your ankle, your knee, your hip to all talk to each other. And later on, we'll add in the thoracic spine as well. So to begin with, you may have been directed in clinic around a particular way of performing this exercise that's sympathetic to your tissues and to your stage of healing or irritation. So we'll go through a few variations, but to start with, let's say that you've got a severely osteoarthritic hip that is currently in flare-up and a little bit sensitized, or may have been in a chronic flare-up for a period of time. Let's say my left hip is the sensitized hip. To start with, we might want to just warm that hip up. So, standing on the center of a clock face, we might just step into a small degree of internal rotation, bearing in mind that internal rotation is going to be a little bit difficult for you at the moment. So don't work into pain. It's really important that you work within your pain-free zone. So initially, your step across might just be, heel to toe, very, very small token movement. Remember, the left is our example sensitized hip. So at the moment, it is unloaded as we step to point to 1 o'clock on our clock face. So my right foot is at the center of the clock pointing to 12, and my left foot is stepping in the direction of 1 o'clock, toes facing 1 o'clock, body facing 1 o'clock, okay? So that hip has passively, in an unloaded state, gone into an internal rotation, or a opposite side rotational step. We're then going to do the opposite. We're going to step into an external rotation, and that might, for you at this stage, be almost just heel to heel, pointing at 9 o'clock, okay? And we're going to go through a steady motion, actively and unloaded, taking this left hip through that internal external rotation range. But you'll notice that the right leg is doing all the work at the moment. So the right leg is going through a chain reaction of loaded articulation of the foot, the ankle, the knee, and the hip. So this is almost a passive mobilization of the joint through internal rotation and external rotation on the right, but it's also actively recruiting your muscles, actively stimulating your sensory receptors, your proprioception, that's your body awareness, and we're retraining some of that motor control on the right-hand side whilst we do this. Now, really, we want that benefit on the left. So now we've gone through a period of time incidentally articulating the right hip, that is our unaffected side, whilst at the same time using unloaded muscle activations to actively warm up the affected hip. We're now going to swap. And as long as you're pain-free, you can stand on the center of the clock with the affected hip. And again, think small movements. So you're just going to step, maybe just heel to toe, pointing your right foot towards 11 o'clock. Body goes with it, facing 11 o'clock. And then stepping out, maybe towards 4 o'clock. For you at this stage, it might just be stepping to 3 o'clock. Body faces 3 o'clock. And foot faces 3 o'clock. So 11 and 3. Opposite side rotational step, same side rotational step. And you might be looking at doing just 5 repetitions of this, 3 to 4 times a day, just to keep these tissues mobilized in a way that your brain understands. Ankle, knee, hip, all talking to each other. And at the moment, we can do that on, in a kitchen with kitchen surfaces to balance on. You can do it with a stick, just holding a stick just to create balance. So if you're really in a sensitized state or you're compromised in your balance and your strength, then this might be all you're doing. 3, 4, 5 repetitions is sufficient. Repeat it frequently, not intensively. And that can just be sufficient to keep your brain engaged with that whole kinetic chain, which is going to do a lot to reduce the overall sensitivity of the tissues whilst working on the viscoelasticity of the hip itself. So in a less compromised state, or a less chronically flared up state, you might look at doing much more of a step. So you might actually step more out to 11 o'clock, allow your body weight to lunge into that forward leg slightly, keeping your heel down on the pivoting leg, facing 12 o'clock on the pivoting leg, but now your body and your right leg are facing 11, and then they're facing 3. More of a step out, more of a step out. In this case, I'm going 11, standing on my 11 o'clock, standing on my 4 o'clock, and turning my body to go with it. So that's now introducing a little bit more three-dimensional motion, and it's just that little bit more challenging. And again, I'm still working actively on the left hip in a loaded state, requiring muscle coordination and joint coordination, but it's creating, as my body orbits around that hip, it's creating an active mobilization of that hip. At the same time, my unloaded right hip is going through an active range of motion without added load. But of course, you're going to swap. Okay, so stepping out maybe to 8 o'clock into 1 o'clock, 8 o'clock and 1 o'clock. It doesn't have to be fast. It can just be a nice even rate. You can look at where you're going. You can have supports if you want to still, but if you're performing this now with more of a step, you're probably a little bit more advanced. Your hips are probably appreciating the warm-up, even if they are still a little bit limited in range. Okay, now to advance on that again, we can look at adding in a little bit of thoracic spine movement as well. So our ankles, our hips and our thoracic spine are sometimes described as the big rocks of the body. They are in close partnership with each other, and we want to try and get the thoracic spine involved now to complete that journey up the kinetic chain. So the movement is much the same. Let's say we can keep the same range and we can keep the same distance, getting into that rhythm. But now we can have our arms out in front and use the momentum, just the momentum of the weight of the arms, just to allow us to rotate just that little bit further. And this is throwing you into what they call your transitional zones, where we're just starting to load the elasticity of the tissues just that little bit more to create a reaction through the body, but also now to mobilize your thoracic spine in the transverse plane, the rotational plane. So my left ankle and foot are working very hard, but they're mobilizing on the transverse plane. So is my knee, so is my hip, and now so is my thoracic spine. And of course, swap and perform in the other direction. You can also use a stick, broomstick, whatever you've got to hand, just to make that movement a little bit more easy for you, if you like. Okay, and that about covers transverse plane 3D maps for your hip.